If you can hear this echo, you've passed Carl Jung's ultimate test. Most people go their entire lives never even knowing to listen for it. But if you're someone who feels things others don't, who knows things you shouldn't be able to know, this echo has been calling to you your whole life. And what Jung discovered about people who can hear it will change everything you thought you knew about your intuition. Here's the controversial part. Jung believed that some people have direct access to humanity's deepest secrets, an invisible library of every experience, every pattern, every lesson learned across millions of years of human existence. He called it the collective unconscious. And if you've been feeling like you're tuned into something others can't perceive, he'd say you're not imagining it. But this gift comes with a dark side that Jung warned about, something that could overwhelm you if you don't understand what's happening. So how do you know if you're actually connected to this collective field? And more importantly, what's the test that proves you've passed? Because according to Jung, there's a signal, an unmistakable echo that only certain people can detect. And if you're hearing it right now, your life is about to make a lot more sense. Carl Jung was supposed to be Sigmund Freud's successor, the heir to the psychoanalytic throne. Their relationship was so close that Freud called Jung his adopted eldest son and his crown prince. But then Jung started experiencing something that would destroy their friendship and get him labeled as a mystic, a madman, someone who'd betrayed the scientific foundation of psychology. He started having dreams that shouldn't have been possible. Vivid, overwhelming dreams filled with symbols he'd never seen, mythological figures he'd never studied, ancient imagery that felt more real than his waking life. At first, Jung tried to explain them away using Freud's theories. Repressed sexuality, childhood trauma, hidden desires, but nothing fit. These weren't memories from his life. They felt ancient, universal, like he was downloading information from a source that existed before he was born. And here's where things got controversial. Jung started claiming these weren't just his dreams, they were humanity's dreams. He proposed that beneath our personal unconscious, there existed a deeper layer shared by all human beings, filled with universal patterns he called archetypes, an inherited psychological structure that every person carried, whether they knew it or not. Freud was furious. The psychoanalytic community turned on him. They said he'd gone mystical, abandoned science, lost his mind. But Jung couldn't ignore what he was experiencing, because the more he explored this collective unconscious, the more he realized something disturbing. Some people had easier access to it than others, and those people, the ones who could hear the echoes, often suffered for it. Now here's where this gets really interesting and potentially unsettling if you recognize yourself in what I'm about to describe. Consider a case profile that perfectly illustrates this principle. Let me walk you through a composite example based on strictly observed patterns Jung documented throughout his career. Picture someone who's never studied mythology, never taken a philosophy class, never been exposed to any spiritual traditions. Yet in their dreams, the same figures keep appearing. A wise old man offering cryptic guidance, a nurturing mother figure, a dark shadow version of themselves that terrifies them. Jung's discovery? These exact same figures appear in dreams across every culture, every time period, every civilization. The Greeks had them, the Egyptians had them, indigenous tribes separated by oceans had them. Different names, different appearances, but identical psychological functions. But here's what made Jung's colleagues uncomfortable. He claimed these weren't learned. You didn't get them from your parents or your culture. They were hardwired into the human psyche, inherited like instincts. The hero, the mother, the shadow, the trickster. Universal patterns residing in the collective unconscious, waiting to emerge. And some people, Jung noticed, seem to have thinner boundaries between their conscious mind and this collective field. They picked up on these patterns more easily. They felt the weight of human experience more directly. They walked into rooms and sensed things others missed. They had dreams that felt prophetic. They experienced emotions that weren't even theirs. If that sounds familiar, Jung would say you're not oversensitive. You're not broken. You're just more permeable to the collective unconscious. And that permeability comes with both gifts and dangers. But wait, because what Jung discovered next was even more controversial. He found that this collective unconscious wasn't just sitting there passively. It was actively trying to communicate, especially with people who could hear it. And it had a language that would either sound like cosmic guidance or complete insanity, depending on how you interpreted it. For years, Jung mapped the territory of the collective unconscious like an explorer charting unknown lands. He studied alchemy, not because he believed in turning lead into gold, but because he recognized alchemical symbolism as encrypted psychology. He dove into Gnosticism, world mythology, fairy tales, religious mysticism. His colleagues thought he'd lost the plot, but Jung had discovered something they couldn't see. He identified the major archetypes: the self, representing the totality of the psyche; the persona, the mask we show the world; the shadow, containing everything we reject about ourselves; the anima and animus, the contrasexual elements within each person. But here's what made his work dangerous. Jung claimed these weren't just concepts. They were autonomous forces that could possess you if you didn't recognize them. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. Every time you fall into the same toxic relationship pattern, that's an archetype playing out. Every time you react to something with disproportionate emotion, you're probably touching an archetypal wound. Every time you're inexplicably drawn to a symbol, story, or person, the collective unconscious is pulling the strings. Let's look at a narrative illustration of how this manifests in real life. We see this dynamic clearly in the story of someone experiencing what Jung called the dark night of the soul. Everything they've built suddenly feels meaningless. Their career, their relationships, their entire identity, it all crumbles. They feel like they're dying, even though nothing physical is wrong. This isn't just a personal crisis, it's the death and rebirth archetype, one of the most powerful patterns in the collective unconscious. And here's the disturbing part. Without knowing anything about Jung, this person starts having specific dreams, descending into caves, crossing dark rivers, facing monsters, being torn apart and reconstructed. Why those exact images? Because the collective unconscious has been guiding humans through this transformation for millennia, and it always uses the same symbolic language. The cave as the womb of rebirth, the river as the boundary between old self and new, the monster as the guardian of transformation. You can't learn this symbolism. It emerges spontaneously because it's archetypal, hardwired into the deepest layers of the human psyche. Now, if what I'm describing sounds impossible or too mystical, Jung had an answer that would frustrate his critics even more. He discovered a phenomenon that seemed to prove the collective unconscious was real and actively responsive. He called it synchronicity. And if you've ever experienced it, you know exactly why it's so hard to dismiss. Synchronicity is Jung's term for meaningful coincidences that seem statistically impossible, yet psychologically undeniable. You think about someone you haven't spoken to in years, and seconds later they call. You're wrestling with a life-changing decision, and the same message appears 5 different times in unrelated contexts. You need specific guidance, and a stranger says exactly what you needed to hear at exactly the right moment. Skeptics call it confirmation bias, pattern recognition gone wild. But Jung argued that when these coincidences cluster during major life transitions, when the timing is impossibly perfect, when they carry profound personal meaning, something else is happening. The collective unconscious is breaking through, offering guidance from the accumulated wisdom of human experience. For empaths and highly sensitive people, synchronicity can feel overwhelming. It's like the universe is constantly speaking directly to you. And Jung would say, that's because it is. Not in a magical sense, but because you're tuned into frequencies most people filter out. Here's a composite example based on patterns Jung observed repeatedly. Consider someone standing at a major crossroads: safe corporate job versus uncertain creative path, security versus authenticity. Logic says stay safe, but something deeper is calling. Then it starts. Over 1 week, the same message appears everywhere. A conversation with a stranger at a coffee shop, a dream where they're standing at a cliff's edge, a song lyric that stops them cold, a book passage that seems written for them, a billboard they've passed 1,000 times but suddenly see. The message, in various forms: the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. One coincidence? Maybe. 5 in 7 days, each hitting at the exact moment of maximum doubt. Jung would say that's the collective unconscious, drawing on thousands of years of similar crossroads, offering the wisdom of everyone who's faced this choice before. And here's the controversial part. Jung claimed this happened more to certain people, the bridges between worlds, the ones who could hear the echo. But there's something Jung warned about that most people ignore. And if you're someone who's permeable to the collective unconscious, this warning could save you from drowning in darkness you don't even realize isn't yours. Dreams became Jung's primary tool for accessing the collective unconscious. But he made a critical distinction that changes everything about dream interpretation. Little dreams process daily life, what you ate, who you talked to, petty anxieties. But big dreams come from somewhere else entirely. They have a different quality, more vivid, more charged. They feel significant in ways you can't articulate. They contain symbols you've never consciously encountered, but that feel ancient and familiar. And they stay with you for years, sometimes forever. We see this principle illustrated in a narrative many people report. Picture someone who dreams of an infinite library stretching in all directions, filled with books in languages they don't recognize but somehow understand. Or someone standing at the shore of a vast ocean, knowing that all human wisdom lies beneath those waves, accessible but requiring them to dive into the unknown. These aren't processing last week's stress. They're the collective unconscious revealing itself, showing you what you're connected to, the vast reservoir of human experience you're swimming in, whether you realize it or not. Jung developed active imagination to deliberately engage these depths. Not meditation, not visualization, something between. You take a dream symbol or persistent image and enter into dialogue with it. You don't control it. You let it unfold, reveal itself, show you what it needs you to understand. For sensitive people, this can be transformative or terrifying because you're already picking up signals from the collective field. Active imagination gives you a way to engage consciously instead of being overwhelmed. But it also means facing what's down there. And not everything in the collective unconscious is light and wisdom. Here's what Jung's critics hated most about his work. He refused to pretend the collective unconscious was all enlightenment and inspiration. He insisted it also contained humanity's collective shadow, every dark impulse, every primal fear, every capacity for violence and destruction that humans have carried for millennia. Universal terrors, genocidal impulses, the mob mentality that can possess entire nations. Jung believed these too are archetypal, patterns in the collective unconscious that can seize individuals and societies when left unacknowledged. Think about symbols that trigger immediate visceral reactions across all cultures: the snake, the spider, the stranger in the dark. These aren't just personal fears, they're evolutionary echoes, survival instincts encoded so deeply, they've become part of our shared inheritance. And here's the disturbing part for empaths. If you're permeable to the collective unconscious, you're not just accessing wisdom, you're also feeling humanity's accumulated pain, trauma, and darkness. That crushing heaviness you sometimes feel watching the news, that overwhelming anxiety in crowds, that might not be yours. You might be picking up the collective shadow, the suffering that humanity carries. Jung was adamant about this. You can't cherry-pick light and ignore darkness. Integration requires acknowledging all of it. The path to wholeness means confronting the shadow, personal and collective. Consider a case profile demonstrating this integration process. Let's examine a composite example of someone deeply invested in spirituality, love and light, positive vibes only. But they keep experiencing intense anger, jealousy, harsh judgment. They're horrified because these feelings contradict their spiritual self-image. What's happening? The shadow is demanding recognition, and beneath the personal shadow lies the collective shadow, because anger and jealousy aren't personal failings. They're human experiences, archetypal energies that every person who's ever lived has encountered. Jung's approach: don't suppress them. Don't spiritually bypass them. Recognize them as part of the full human spectrum. Own them without being owned by them. Integrate the shadow instead of projecting it onto others. Because when you deny your darkness, you inevitably see it everywhere outside yourself. Now here's where Jung's work reveals why certain stories grip you in ways you can't explain, and why understanding mythology might be the key to understanding your own life. Jung became obsessed with mythology because he recognized something scholars missed. Myths aren't primitive superstitions or ancient entertainment. They're sophisticated psychological maps created by the collective unconscious to guide humans through the archetypal journey of life. Every culture has a flood myth, a creation story, a hero who descends into darkness and returns transformed, a trickster who breaks rules and creates chaos leading to new order. These emerge independently across civilizations because they're describing psychological realities, archetypal patterns inherent to being human. When a particular myth or story moves you deeply, that's not random. The collective unconscious is resonating with your current psychological state, showing you the map for where you are in your journey. The hero's journey appears everywhere because it describes the archetypal pattern of growth. Ordinary world, call to adventure, refusal, threshold crossing, trials, descent into darkness, discovery of the treasure, return transformed, sharing the gift. Recognize anything? That career change that terrified you, that relationship that forced you into the unknown, that period of isolation where you had to face yourself, that breakthrough that changed everything, that return to normal life carrying new wisdom. For empaths, understanding this framework transforms overwhelm into meaning. That painful isolation, the archetypal descent necessary before transformation, that sudden clarity, the discovery of the boon. You're not suffering randomly. You're on the ancient path countless others have walked, and the collective unconscious is guiding you. Here's where Jung's work becomes radical, especially in a world that treats empathic abilities as disorders to manage or weaknesses to overcome. What if your sensitivity isn't a flaw, but a feature? What if you're not broken, but more permeable to the collective unconscious? What if overwhelming feelings, intuitive knowings, and sensing things others miss are signs you're tuned into humanity's shared frequency? Jung believed certain individuals serve as bridges between the collective unconscious and conscious awareness. Shamans, artists, mystics, depth, psychologists, people who access the depths and bring back insights for everyone else. If you recognize yourself, you might be one of those bridges. Yes, it's overwhelming. The collective unconscious contains everything: ecstasy and agony, wisdom and trauma, light and shadow, heights and depths. Being permeable means feeling more, processing more, carrying more than others around you. But it also means access to wisdom transcending individual experience. Your intuition is plugged into millions of years of accumulated knowledge. When you just know something without explanation, you might be receiving information from the collective field, accessing patterns that have guided humans forever. So here it is, the test Jung never explicitly stated, but that runs through all his work. Can you hear the voice that isn't yours, but also isn't not yours? Can you feel knowledge you never learned, but somehow already possess? Can you sense patterns repeating, archetypes playing out, the collective story unfolding through your individual life? That's the echo. That's the signal from the collective unconscious. If you can hear it, you've passed. Because most people never even know to listen. They're so identified with their personal ego, so embedded in the rational surface of consciousness that deeper frequencies don't register. They experience life as random events happening to an isolated individual, never recognizing the archetypal patterns weaving through everything. But you're different. You've always been different. You feel more, sense more, know more than logic can explain. And Jung would say, that's not something wrong with you. That's something profoundly right. You're more connected to the source, more permeable to the depths, more attuned to frequencies most people filter out. The challenge isn't accessing the collective unconscious. If you're watching this, you're already doing that whether you want to or not. The challenge is learning to work with it consciously, distinguishing personal psychology from archetypal patterns, recognizing when you're living your story versus enacting a collective drama, receiving the gifts without drowning in the depths. And here's what Jung warned about most urgently. This access can destroy you if you identify with it. If you think these archetypal energies are personally yours, if you believe you're special rather than simply permeable. The collective unconscious is vast and powerful, and it can possess you if you're not careful. Let me be absolutely clear. This isn't about being special or superior. Jung explicitly warned against ego inflation, the trap of identifying with archetypal energies and thinking you're more evolved than others. The collective unconscious is collective. It belongs to everyone. Every human carries it. Some are just more conscious of it. Some have more permeable boundaries. Some serve as bridges. But we're all swimming in the same ocean. Your sensitivity makes you responsible, not superior. Responsible for bringing consciousness to what's unconscious, for articulating what others feel but can't name, for serving as a bridge between depths and surface, for processing archetypal energies so they don't possess the collective unconsciously. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you engage with the collective unconscious, the more individual you become. True individuation requires integrating both personal and collective, individual and universal, unique and archetypal. You're not just your ego or your personal history. You're a unique expression of the collective human psyche, shaped by forces within and beyond individual experience. You're where the collective unconscious becomes conscious, where archetypal patterns take individual form. When you trust intuition, you're trusting accumulated species wisdom. When you follow synchronicity, you're aligning with patterns guiding humans for millennia. When you face your shadow, you're doing work not just for yourself, but for the collective, because every individual who integrates shadow reduces unconscious darkness in the collective field. This is Jung's individuation. Not becoming separate, but becoming wholly yourself while recognizing deep connection to all humanity. Paradoxical, absolutely, but the collective unconscious deals in paradox, in reconciling opposites, in both and rather than either or. So what do you actually do with this? Start paying attention to dreams, especially ones that feel significant. Keep a journal. Learn to recognize archetypal patterns in your life. Are you in a hero's journey? Wrestling your shadow. Notice synchronicities without forcing them. Create space for active imagination. Study mythology and recognize universal patterns in your individual story. Most importantly, trust yourself. Trust inexplicable knowings. Trust gut feelings logic can't explain. Trust the inner voice speaking in symbols and sensations. Trust that your sensitivity serves a purpose. Your permeability is a gift. Your ability to hear the echo is exactly what the world needs. Because that's not just you. That's the collective, unconscious, accumulated human wisdom offering guidance for your journey. You passed the test the moment you recognized something deeper to listen for. The echo is calling, and you've been hearing it all along. The collective unconscious is speaking. The question is, are you listening? In the alchemist's path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.